Welcome to Essential Coaching Conversations with Kyle and Asim.
The real, relevant, necessary conversations to help you navigate coaching, teaching, learning, and life.
We're back. Coaches, welcome in. Season 2, episode 29. And we're debuting some new features of the pod. I think it's time for, we sort of agree it's a little bit time for a reset here. I'm pretty sure, and Kyle, I think, you just said, I think 28 was not the first time we started naming athletes with their numbers. I think you're right. I think 28 was what it was, and that was our last episode. So we're going to move on to something else. We were doing the Would You Rathers for a while. Maybe we'll bring those back, but right now we're just going to go with a segment to open the pod. And it's very similar, and this is not, we're not stealing this from Scott Van Pelt, but very similar to sort of the best thing I saw, but we're workshopping a name. We still don't have a name for it. But this is one thing we're going to ask our audience for. Please, if you have suggestions on what we can name this segment, it is very similar to the best thing we saw. It doesn't have to be anything sport related. Mine is certainly not sport related at all. But we are going to jump in with that segment to start the pod because I think, you know what? We're all sort of chronically online. We're chronically taking in information and, seeing all kinds of crazy stuff that's going on. Good, bad, ugly, whatever. And sometimes it's just like we should talk about it and see if our algorithms are the same, which I'm pretty sure they are. But my thing, Kyle, and I'll throw it to you. Actually, let's do this. I'll throw it to you first. Kyle, what's the best thing since we've recorded last, which was almost a month ago now? What was the best thing you've seen or the thing that stuck with you and that is still viral in your mind and making you sort of reflect and think?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take a moment to shout out some of my crew here at Tech, our creative department, communications department, this new broadcasting department, of course, the marketing group that I run, and the countless hours and time that are put in that are mostly behind the scenes that people don't, of course, we're an external unit, so you're seeing a lot of the products, but you don't get to see the people behind it. And we've got a lot of very, very talented people, and June, Josh, and Waylon that are running our creative group have kind of revolutionized social media and the creative content side for La Tech Athletics. And the thing that I love about what they are doing and again, my group as a whole is that, typical underrepresented sports that are smaller sports without the same type of platforms. We've got a nationally ranked women's bowling team, there's men's golf, there's volleyball, so on and so forth. My own soccer program that I work with. That's not football, right? Like not the same type of eyeballs, not on TV as much, that sort of thing. But they have been able to create a certain standard of work and product to where the freaking cross country hype video is on par.
That was so cool.
With the basketball hype video,
that
right?
Was so cool. Yeah.
Like the fall baseball hype video that dropped today is better than your postseason hype video. Mm-hmm. And those guys have figured out a way to do that. And so I say all that to say this: we hosted the Battle of the Boot, our MTE volleyball tournament last weekend at home. And Josh, our guy that handles women's volleyball is responsible for their content. And he created their intro video, which is played on the video board after starting lineups before the match starts. Lights go dim, all that stuff. And we were playing Southern University, and I caught myself watching the athletes from Southern watching our video and their reaction.
That's to pretty cool. Yeah.
Our video, they clapped, their heads were nodding, they were into it. And they basically gave, they didn't know this, but they were giving Josh a standing ovation watching that hype video for a team that they're about to compete against. But it was like they were lost in that moment. You could just tell like that was a very cool moment where it created a little innocence in the room too. And like you're just there for the fun of sport. And then our head coach, Amber McCrae, like there was a picture of our team like looking up at the video board during that. And they just had this smile on her face. And she even commented on it like that was her favorite picture of the weekend because you just saw the joy of like it was their sport being featured and somebody poured that type of effort into their sport and their moment. And, you know, for us selfishly, you know, we want that as like tech folks, but it was just really cool to see like the other team, the opponent, um, just being into it and like basically vibing with it and, you know, going kind of crazy. And so just a shout out to my entire team and specifically that creative crew. And then in this instance, specifically Josh, for just crafting that kind of a moment, which just felt very organic, very authentic, very emotional. And it was just cool because it's kind of like when your art and your science kind of collide together and you create something like that. I thought that was really neat. It's cool to see.
I love that you describe it as creating an air of innocence. And it's like, hey, we're just here to play this sport and like this is what it's supposed to feel like. And I think it is the ultimate sign of respect when the other team compliments anything that you guys do,
Mm,
right? With their actions. They don't even have to say it. And I'm hopeful that Josh felt really good about that and like seeing that, you know, helps him too to understand that like he's doing some great work
he's
because
doing
those
great work.
videos are sick.
He was sitting next to me, like getting his camera ready, and I was like, "Oh man, like this video is like the volleyball videos. It's freaking amazing." And we were watching it, and I always watch our team, but I happened to catch myself like watching the Southern athletes. I was like, "Bro, watch them. Like that's you. Like you created that, and
Heck
you know
yeah.
that was probably a viral moment in their mind, you know." And
Mm-hmm.
they were just like, "Wow, that was really cool." And I was like, "You manufactured that. Like that's got to be like just an intense sense of like pride and know that
Mm-hmm.
that video that is, you know, maybe 57 seconds long took hours
Sure.
of planning, prep, media day, editing, you know, this, that, the idea, coming up with all that. And to just kind of see, you know, the meal come together
Mm-hmm.
from that recipe and all the work that goes into it, it was awesome. Best thing I
Oh,
saw.
that's how you push the envelope too, because now I'm sure those athletes are going back to Southern being like, hey, how do we get one of those?
Yeah, no doubt.
You know, how come we
Yep.
don't have a sick intro video like that?
We just pissed somebody off down there.
Yeah,
It's just,
right. Right. Their marketing department's like, God, Kyle, come on. Don't your staff is too good. Yeah, no, I love it. And so I think, you know, for me, when you said the innocence piece and, you know, just kind of that raw, sort of authentic moment, this might strike people as a little odd, but the best thing that I've seen over the last couple weeks, um, there's this little hippo in Thailand named Mu Dang. And I'm sure people know who this is. If you don't know who it is, just type it in Moodeng. Um, a little bit of backstory for those that don't know. My mom was born and raised in Africa. I went back about 20 years ago. I went with her to go back. Um, and I actually get to feed one of these pygmy hippos. All right. And like, no joke, they will hold their mouth open and you just toss a whole mini watermelon into their mouth and they will eat it. Right. But this little mini hippo, Mudang, this pygmy hippo, they are an endangered species. But what I think is like really cool, and not just because it's super cute and like chaotic nonstop, and it's like a little kid and a puppy all rolled into one, just running around. Um, I think what's really cool is like she doesn't know she's endangered. She doesn't know how big of a star she is online. She doesn't know anything about that. She's literally just living her best life as a baby pygmy hippo, just running around, having fun, causing chaos. Like I saw a clip of her today, like a monkey slapped her in the face and she like ran around to her mom or something and laid down. You know what I mean? Like, and it sounds ridiculous on Essential Coaching Conversations podcast for me to be sitting here talking about a pygmy hippo, but like, I really think we can learn a lot from just realizing that we are like very, very small and we can do whatever it is we need to do. And we don't have to worry about a lot of the things that we worry about constantly. And so that's the best thing I've seen. Like I will stop and watch every video of this hippo. I will stop and look at every picture of this hippo. And I love that like sports teams have started like photoshopping her with their uniform or like putting her on the field or we're at a press conference. I forget who it was, but they had her like at the podium answering questions, like one of the sports team. I just thought it was funny. Like I think those are the things that like, you know, it's like Fiona a few years ago at the Cincinnati Zoo. It's sort of the same thing. Like we forget that there's this whole world out there, and like this little pygmy hippo is just running. I'm telling you, Kyle, like you've seen some of the videos, wild, like gnawing on the zookeeper, like biting their knees and stuff when they're like petting, like trying to rub, like give her a bath and stuff. I mean, it's just wild, right? Like, but I do think that when you talk about, you know, the video that you just talked about and how it created this air of innocence, and it's like, this is organically what it's supposed to be about. And we can just take a moment and have some joy. Like, that's to me what this is about, especially at like, you know, personally at not a very joyous time. And we don't have to get into that, but like, you know, we had a loss in our family that was fairly significant. And like, you know, anything that can bring some of that joy is a welcome thing. So mine is not quite as sort of like seminal and spiritual as yours, and like knowing that you guys are doing great work at Louisiana Tech, but Mudang for the win. That was my favorite thing that I saw. Again, we are workshopping a name for this segment. Please send in your suggestions. And also, if you have suggestions or things that you see, please send them to us. And we might be able to start doing some sort of like a mailbag segment, or, you know, hey, if 5 people send us the same thing, we'd be like, all right, yeah, let's go talk about that thing. Um, so I'm a big fan of this segment, and I think it'll just continue to evolve as we go. But Kyle, so let's talk about the meat now of this episode. In the pre-show, we were talking about a lot of things, particularly around sort of health and balance and things like that. I know these are topics we broached before, but we got fairly specific with it, with the ring that you wear on your left index finger. Do you want to jump into that and then we can just keep going from there?
Yeah. So not a sponsor, holler if you want to be. I wear an Oura ring on my left index finger. And my favorite thing about this is I love waking up every morning and reading my sleep score. So I'll give you a sleep score. If you're not familiar, there's an app on my phone. Wear the ring. It keeps up similar to an Apple Watch and all these other things like FitBits and that sort of thing. And it gives me a readiness score, a sleep score, an activity score, and something that's fairly new, a resilience score. And my favorite thing to do in the morning is wake up and read my sleep score. And I kind of have this little game with myself where I like to try to guess what I think the sleep score is going to be based on how I kind of feel, or, you know, if I'm a little groggy waking up, or if I, knew I went to bed really late. And what's really difficult about my job is I do not go to bed at the same time every night. I've always heard that it's not so much sleeping really long time or even like when you go to bed, but it's about consistency, right? So your body gets into a rhythm. Well, if I have an event, I might quite literally get home from a football game at 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's when we're at home. When I was traveling, it was even, worse. I may get home at 4 o'clock in the morning. I may work 3 or 4 or 5. I may work 10, 11, 12 days in a row. And I was kind of joking with my wife about, like, I've been calling them these little 36-hour vacations. And she's like, you mean a weekend? Like, it's what everybody else would call a weekend. And I will take my like little 36-hour vacation, like the one day that we don't have an event, during the week. And my 36-hour vacation might be like on a Thursday. right? Like I don't get a weekend typically. And so with a chaotic schedule like that, you start to notice some things about yourself and your body and how you're feeling and so on and so forth. And ultimately what the Oura Ring does is it helps me raise awareness to how I'm feeling, and it gives me my heart rate, my stress level, so on and so forth. Well, last night, I was home and I passed out at like 8:30. Kendall goes to bed around 8 or so, go tuck her in, whatever. And I was just laying in bed. And the next thing I know, I remember Kendall coming, kissing me goodnight. And then I'm waking up at like 6:30 the next morning. I slept for like 10 hours. It was amazing. I don't remember anything. And my sleep score was a 93, which is out of 100. So 93 is phenomenal. They give you a little, you get like a little crown, optimal, if you get into the 90s. And most of my sleep scores are typically like low 80s, mid 80s, are pretty good. But what I've noticed about it is it it kind of dings you if you don't go to bed, quote unquote, on time. And the more data this thing gets on you, the more it kind of learns your body and your circadian rhythms and all that kind of stuff. And it'll tell you like, hey, your bedtime's approaching. And it like right now, it's going to tell me like it's almost 9 o'clock here. Like, hey, it's time to go to bed. Well, I know I'm not going to go to bed for at least 2 more hours, right? So it kind of gets mad at you when you don't go to bed on time, but it will reward you if you do go to bed on time. So like I can go to sleep at say 12:30 in the morning, wake up at 6:30 and get like a fairly efficient 5 to 6 hours sleep, but it doesn't give you a very good score because you went to bed too late, right? And I'm somebody that, if you put me in the bed and my head hits the pillow, I can fall asleep. Like it's just knock on wood, it's one of my best characteristics. I can fall asleep. I don't usually have a problem, you know, knocking out. But if you don't go to bed, quote unquote, on time, like it'll kind of ding you. And then it gives you, based off of that, it'll give you a readiness score and stress and all that kind of stuff. And so it's been neat. I probably had the ring for a year and a half or so, I want to say. And it'll give you like seasonal reports and annual reports and trends. And like, so right now, my trend is that I'm not active enough. I'm busy. I'm stressed. I'm not working out. All that kind of stuff. And so it's been this really neat thing just to kind of raise some awareness about it, because I probably wouldn't wake up every morning and think like, oh, how efficient was my sleep? How do I feel? Like, did I notice that when I woke up, I didn't want to pop out of bed and all that kind of stuff? And so I was really, really jacked up about my 93 uh, sleep score. And just for some context, like the night before, my sleep score was a 70. I didn't go to bed until like 12:30 or 1 o'clock in the morning. And it'll give you all these little scores: efficiency, restfulness, how much REM sleep you had, how much deep sleep you had. It's got this really cool chart where it charts like the moments that you're awake. And then, of course, like you don't really know you're awake when you're sleeping, but it'll tell you like it'll charting your movement and your heart rate. The other thing I've learned is that my heart rate, like my lowest resting heart rate, is like pretty low. Like it's not uncommon for it to be low 40s or like dip to like 39. And my wife's like, "Are you alive? Like, are you are you awake? Like, are you breathing or anything like that?" But I have a fairly low resting
That is
heart rate.
extremely low.
It's very low, but it's normal for me. Where hers is probably like in like the mid 60s. So she has a ring too. Like I think I got these for us for Christmas one year or something. So, but I can just kind of tell like when I wake up, all right, I'm going to guess like this is an 86 or a 70 or a 92. Just kind of based on all that. And so, as I get into my busier season, the other fun thing is like looking at my stress level on a football game day versus a normal game day, or even like the time leading up to a football game or during a football game. And you just sort of like hum and buzz at a much higher heart rate and a stress level. And this chart's just all over the place. It's a roller coaster of what all's going on. And you would think like after a long, stressful day where you're on edge all the time, that you would come home and you would be able to just kind of pass out and fall asleep. But that's not necessarily the case. Like you might be able to fall asleep, but it's not a restful sleep.
Right.
Right. And so trying to learn, okay, what can I do to put my body and my mind, because it's obviously I have a million things going on. It's hard to turn your brain off. Like, what can I do to basically calm down, breathe deeper, slow my heart rate down, and just try to relax even before I fall asleep. And so, again, just what's been interesting about the ring is how much more thought I put into this and like how much more aware I am. And so, anyway, I'm rambling now, but I'm telling you kind of all this story, and you bring up a great point that like Fitbits, Apple Watches, Oura Rings, every college athlete in the country is hooked up to a heart monitor, a GPS locator, like all these kinds of things. And as you put it, like we're almost gamifying life. I mean, you think about it, even in the classroom we were teaching, like Kahoot and everything, like everything is kind of turned and made into a game. And the question is sort of like, well, why? Like, why are we doing that to ourselves? Like, and it
Mhm.
almost seems kind of funny that I would even wear a ring to tell me like, hey, a-hole, go to bed. Like, this is not good for you, like close the computer.
I hope it doesn't say that on the notifications, like,
It
"Hey,
doesn't
Abel,
on the
go to
note.
bed."
It does kind of like a little hand comes out of my phone and slaps me. I was like, hey, it's bedtime. Like, go to sleep. But anyway, so I kind of like throw that question to you. Like, it is amazing, like how much more technology we have to make us better at life. But I'm still tired. I'm still
Yeah,
stressed. Still like
yeah.
all these things. It doesn't fix my problems. It just makes me more aware about them. And maybe in some roundabout way, like I try to work on stuff or I'm
Mhm.
at least mindful about it. But I do think it's kind of an interesting conversation because this doesn't even have to just be in sport. But I mean, you think about all the technology, and now we're getting
Oh,
into
yeah.
this AI space, where we're building models of analytics and statistics about what's going to help us win or what's going to make us successful, or should we buy in the stock market or not buy in the stock market, or how are we? I mean, hell, you were telling me about some of the stuff you're going through with these job interviews, where like job interviews aren't job interviews anymore. Like it's a totally different ball game on how some of that stuff kind of works. So technology keeps progressing and like infiltrating into our lives, but ever since we've kind of come out of COVID, like we never really learned our lesson from COVID,
Nope.
right? Like we're just right back into the thick of things. So I don't know. I'll shut up and kind of throw it over to you and kind of get your thoughts. But I do think that's kind of an interesting thing to maybe dive into and see where it takes us.
So let me ask you this before I go into what some of the things I had written down. And it's actually so funny that you said the heart monitor thing, because I wrote down work rate with heart monitor as you were saying that. Like right before you said it, I wrote that down because I want to come back to that.
Okay.
Um, do you notice, and maybe you haven't paid enough attention through having all these analytics, and that's what it is, right? It's statistics, it's analytics about you. Having all of that health data available, have you noticed a discernible difference between like a 90 some odd sleep score and a 70 sleep score with how you feel the next day when you get up?
So that's a great question. I don't when I first wake up. I don't care if I sleep 2 hours or if I sleep 12 or 7.5. I feel terrible the moment I wake up. I
Yep.
don't want to get out of bed. I cannot pop my eyes open and just roll out of bed. I'm
Yep.
somebody that's going to want to lay there like our cat who's old as hell and just ornery. She'll come and she'll slap me in the face and want to be fed. And I'll wake up. And that might be at 2 in the morning. It might be 4 in the morning. It might be 6:30 in the morning. And I don't really need to get into the shower until 7. I'm going to go back to bed and I'm going
Mm.
to sleep for 20 more minutes because I can just do that. But I still feel the same groggy, crappy way the moment I wake up. Now, my sort of superpower is once I'm in the shower and I'm out of the shower, I'm awake. Like
Mm.
I'm good to go. And so I don't necessarily feel that when I wake up. Like I dread waking up. I feel it at 10 o'clock in the morning, at noon, getting through that 2 o'clock, that 2:30 feeling. Like
Yep.
I feel it later in the day.
Yeah.
But I am never going to be one that wakes up and is like, birds are singing, my feet hit the floor, I'm yawning, and I'm ready to tackle the day. No, if, as easy as I can fall asleep, I struggle with the waking up.
Mm-hmm.
But a 93 sleep score today during the day felt different than a 70 did yesterday.
See, that the reason I ask that is because I always try to put these types of things in terms of like, how do we utilize whatever we're talking about, right? It could be this, it could be any things that we've talked about, and help young people be more successful. And so I ask you about that discernible difference because I think like we would all think just logically, like, yeah, if I had a 93 sleep score, then that means I'm going to wake up refreshed and like I'm ready to go and birds are going to help me dress in the morning, right? Like, but that's not realistic.
Does not
Where
happen for
we
me.
do feel it is our extended amount of energy that we would have during the day. And so I say that to say this: when are most practices held for youth and high school and college sports? They're not at
Afternoon, after
6 in the morning. They're going to be in the afternoon.
they're going to be at 3 o'clock when school gets out. Yeah.
Right. And so, how do we then utilize things like an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch, which I like? Listen, you and I both saw this when we taught and when we coached. I would reasonably say 80% of the kids had some sort of smartwatch that was tracking all the stuff. Being able to leverage that and say, hey, we're going to use this technology. If you have it, we're going to use this technology to be the best in our conference at getting 90 plus sleep scores every night. Right? Almost like when I taught special ed, right? We would write IEPs. And you write an IEP goal 4 out of 5 observable times, something's going to happen. Why would we not apply the same thing and gamify our performance on things that actually matter, which is our sleep, what we're eating, our stress levels, all those resilience scores? I mean, geez, resilience is like the buzzword, right? Well, we have a score for it now, right? What about our blood pressure? What about our blood sugar? What about all of those things that, and obviously like an Oura Ring can't test your blood sugar, but like, you know what I'm saying, right?
Sure.
So the oxygen levels in your blood. That was a big thing we were all testing during COVID. We had the little thing that you put on your finger and like it, whatever. And so I'm really glad that we're talking about this because I think it harkens back a little bit to what we've talked about in the chat recently, but it also just sort of serves to prove the point that when we make things a competition, when we do gamify those things, we can narrow down pretty quickly what it is we feel like is important to us. And we put a score on it, just like we do in 100-point games. And all of a sudden, we're humming at a higher level. What if we were to use the scores from an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch or a Fitbit and apply that into 100-point games? And you have like a 100-point games health score for the day. How much better would that make a team or even just a player, right? Let's say a player is struggling. So when I coached girls and women, we had a lot of issues on many of my teams, whether, it didn't matter. High school, college, did not matter. It's sort of universal, right? There's some body image issues. There's caloric intake issues. My assistant Amy would tell you that like eating disorders are really common amongst female athletes. Well, if we are able to gamify that in a positive way, utilizing some of these technologies that are out there that most of these kids have access to, all of a sudden, are we not revolutionizing the sport experience and adding a layer to it that's also creating lifetime health? Right? Because when I was no joke, I've coached in a lot of high academic environments. It was a constant competition. It was almost like a badge of honor to say that you were the one that stayed up the latest studying. Oh, well, I was up until 2 in the morning writing that paper. Oh, well, I was up until 4 doing this. I didn't even go to sleep. Well, what'd you have to eat today? I had a granola bar. I'm sorry, what? And so show me on your Apple Watch that you wear during practice how many calories you're going to burn in this 2.5 hour practice where we're going up and down 60% of the time. Oh, you just burned 3,000 calories and all you had to eat today was a granola bar?
Mm-hmm.
Let's have a conversation about how that does not align to your stated goals. Right. So it's not weaponizing the metrics that are being given to us, it's using that information and using it to create optimal decisions that our players, that our coaches, that anybody can make. Right. And so, like, we were comparing apps earlier. I wear an Apple Watch. Like, I don't wear it all the time. I probably should. But I certainly wear it when I'm working out. And, like, for those that don't know, I've been on, and this is courtesy of our buddy, our buddy Bubba, who got me onto DDP yoga. And, it's been life changing for me. And just knowing that I can track my heart rate, I get an accurate count on my calories, all of those things, I can look in the app and say, like, okay, this is how many calories I've burned this week. This is what I've been doing this week. This is how much I weigh. This is how strong I feel. You can observe all of those things within most of these apps, whether it's, closing rings on your Apple Watch or your health app or, whatever. There are so many ways that we can utilize technology to optimize what our athletes do, to optimize what we do. And I'm curious, Kyle, from your sort of perspective here, what gets in the way of us doing that? And so another way I guess we can say optimizing is like, what gets in the way of being congruent when we see all of this stuff that we have access to and that matching the action that we want to take?
I think you made a great point about the intent behind the data and not weaponizing it. And I think what you can see, all across the country and programs everywhere is we're taking this data and we're using it to turn it against you. So it's not rewarding the good, it's to point out the bad, or to say like, oh, so and so did X on their GPS or X on their heart rate monitor or X on this or that. And then, but Sally over here didn't. And we're going to use that to basically nullify the good and, you know, blow up the bad. And so I think the intent behind it is important. And one of our fake fundamental chats, like the mile test and all this conditioning and like, the very first day of practice, we got to run till we puke to prove that you're not in shape. Well, it's the first freaking day of practice. We're not supposed to be in shape, all right? Like, so we're exposing what you didn't do over the break, which we would tell you was supposed to be a break, but then we basically punish you for taking the break because you're not ready to go on day one, right? And so then we add all these layers of technology to basically expose what you're not doing, or it's the same thing. It doesn't even have to be a health related. It could be shot trackers. You're putting in your makes over the summer about whatever else. And it's about trying to play gotcha and caught you not doing what you were supposed to be doing. So I think the intent behind it, for one thing, is there has to be some guardrails on it because it can become extremely unhealthy pretty quickly. And then anytime you put somebody into a game, what are some people going to do? They're going to cheat and they're going to kind of find a workaround to do that. So now not only are we not actively trying to make the next best decision, we are trying to manufacture data that is false and telling incomplete truths, because then we'll say, well, numbers don't lie. But of course they do. They tell incomplete truths, and they tell the story that we want to share. We can manipulate that data any way we want to. And I mean, we've seen it even with coaches we've worked with on tryouts. We've helped people create tryout rubrics. And the only reason I'm creating this tryout rubric is because I know Asim sucks and he's a little shithead and his mom's crazy and I don't want him around my program. So I'm going to build this rubric that I know will give him a deflated score so I can prove to the principal that's why I cut him.
Those are also all things that are true about me. I know that we have a great relationship. You pegged me 100% right there, man.
It's a different Asim. It's another
100%.
Asim that I know.
I don't know any other Asim, so that's amazing that you know too. That's amazing. Um, no, but sorry to interrupt, but that so it got me thinking when you were saying that though, right? You've said this before on the pod about Lionel Messi, right? And it's
Yeah,
like if you were to watch Messi play, well, he all he does is walk around, right? What is his catapult gonna say?
lazy.
Lazy. What's his work rate? It's not very high, is it? Yet he's the best player to ever touch a soccer ball,
Yeah.
right? And so I to that point that you were just making about like fudging the numbers and kind of making it up to say what you want it to say, I would err on the side of saying like it's easier to do it that way to create the narrative that you want and then to make the numbers match that than it is to approach it from the opposite side, which is how do I make these numbers work for us?
Mm.
And how do I like, and this is the funniest thing, right? We've done the coach speak chat on this. And I think, did we do an episode on this? I can't remember, but the coach speak of 1% better, right? Well, here's what about that? What about that sleep score? What if we make it 1% better? What if we could just make it 1% better on average by the end of the month?
Mm.
How is that going to help? And so Stanford did that study. And for the basketball coaches out there that don't know about this study, Stanford did a study, I believe it was back in 2015, 2018, something like that, where they studied the men's basketball team and they found that like their shooting percentages and their speed increased based on the amount of sleep that they were getting. And it wasn't just a small increase, it's like a marked increase in all of the metrics that we are measuring in terms of 3-point percentage, free throw percentage, three-quarter court sprints, all of that stuff. And so if we were to take an Oura Ring, an Apple Watch, any of this wearable technology or a Catapult, whatever, and say, hey, how do we increase over the course of the next month? Can we make it a goal to increase? Can we make it our mission to increase all of these things by 1%? How much of a collective impact would that have on our sport performance? And not just on our sport performance, but on our athletes' mental health, on our coaches' mental health. And you couple that with some strategic scheduling to where you're not having practice at 6 o'clock in the morning. All of a sudden, what's the aggregate effect of that?
So you go back to our priorities, right? Connection, health, speed, engagement. Your best ability is your availability. We hear this all the time. And I mean, we've talked about this hitting the postseason. Like, would you rather be, the most scouted up scheme team, or would you rather be the healthiest team? Would you rather be the rested team? Would you rather be the most explosive, fast team because your athletes can move? Would you rather have the best hips? Would you rather have the best minds? All of that kind of stuff. So it's almost like this is crazy to even like suggest or say that anybody would do this, but like, what if our starting five was based off of whoever had the best aggregate sleep scores for the week? Because it's who was taking care of themselves, and that's what we prioritized. Can't imagine anybody actually doing that. But what if that's what we put into our formula? What if that was a part of our competitive cauldron where it's not just who made the most free throws during practice or who won the most 1v1s or who scored the most in, 100-point games? What if some of that stuff was actually thrown into the formula and was a part of the aggregate? And we said, hey, like, yeah, you're doing all these, you're checking off these things, but you're totally whiffing here because it's not about, you mentioned like, all right, I stayed up till 2 o'clock. Well, Asim says he stayed up till 4, and Bubba goes, well, I didn't sleep at all, as if
Mm,
kind of like beat you. Well, it's not just that one night.
right.
That's happening 3 or 4 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
And over the course of a season, when we hit February, we all know those teams in our district, our conference, our league that get better the last month of the season. And we all know those teams that start out hot and we're talented and we're good and we're winning games when they weren't supposed to and got a little lucky. And then all of a sudden they seem to fade come district tournament time, conference tournament time. And we wonder like, well, what is it? Did they, did their talent catch up with them, or did other coaches finally figure out how to scout them? I would be willing to bet that like that team's either running out of gas, they're
Mm-hmm.
burned out mentally, they can't stand each other, so they're not quite as connected as they were. Those priorities of health, speed, connection, and engagement are trending up for some teams the last 2 weeks of the season, and they're trending down for others.
Mm-hmm.
And those teams that seemingly always make the tournament, they limp in as the 6 or 7 seed, and then they get knocked out in the first round. They're just steady, like they are what they are. They're not bad or detrimental, but they also don't know how to take the next step, how to get 1% better, how to take what they know and try to improve upon that. And I would be interested, like if you're coaching right now, go back and look at your district, like however it's set up. I know it's different everywhere, right? Some people play in districts, some people play in conferences, some people play in, state tournaments, whatever. And just kind of look at the teams that are like always good at the end. And you'd be like, well, they're talented. And sure, it takes a lot of talent. I will be the first to admit that you've got to have talent to get there. But there are also, for every talented team, there's a handful of talented teams that don't ever get where they need to be because they
Yep.
underachieve.
Yep.
And it might not be because they got injured, or but they're just not connected, or they're not engaged. And it's typically not the team that makes the spectacular play that wins. It's the team that avoids making the boneheaded play that wins. It's not so much about winning as it is not losing. And so if you think I'm more refreshed, I make better decisions, I can move more, and we communicate better, we're going to give ourselves a chance, fake statistic, 90% of the time, and we're going to come out on top more often than not. All things equal, the more talented team will typically take the cake, barring a bad official's call or just some dumb luck or something like that. But if you think about all of this stuff being factored into who we are with these priorities, connection, speed, health, and engagement, taking care of yourselves in this way and looking for that in between the margins, how do we find our edge? It's not your out of bounds plays.
Nope.
It's not your alignment on defense. It's not something that is schematic that's going to get that done. Because again, all things equal, like, and maybe this is a topic for another day, but like how many coaches actually out there think that they scheme up better than over half the coaches out there? Every coach would tell you they're good at that. So if every coach is good at that, then that makes us all pretty even when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
scouting, tactical decisions, so on and so forth. So then in this razor thin margin of wins and losses, of success and failure, how are we building our own luck and sort of insulating ourselves from the unfortunate things? And I go back to, Brian's books on anti-fragility, like within offense and defense. And I think about this anti-fragility thing all the time, like even in what I'm doing. My crew right now is rocking, but we're fragile. Like we don't have a lot of depth. If I lose somebody tomorrow, like we're going to struggle. If
Mm-hmm.
somebody misses a day, we're going to be in a tough spot. Like everything that we're doing right now, we're humming like it's a house of cards. And so we're working every day to build some of that depth and insulate ourselves from the things that we cannot control. And I think about that anti-fragility, which is sort of the, along the same lines of that resilience word you said earlier. To me, that's the ultimate goal, is how do we increase our anti-fragility score? How do we, when the wind does blow and our house does not get knocked down, like that allows us to keep moving forward. So it's not just being persistent and taking the punch in the face, it's being resilient, taking the punch in the face and then being able to punch back. And I think that's the difference between good and elite, winning and losing.
So what you're talking about, we can sum up with two EC-isms. What you're talking about is stacking the deck, right? Literally a house of cards, but stacking the deck to make sure that we have the sturdiest ones.
Yep.
And then individually, everybody heating the cheese to ensure that they are getting 1% better at all these things we're trying to do so that we are not as fragile. And it's funny because the last several teams that I've coached, we always started the season with the Heat the Cheese story. And it was about the individual responsibility to do your job. Even if it's not your job, do your job. And part of doing that job was making sure that your six, your accountability partner, was doing their part. And yet, when we got to February, when we got to March, particularly like when I was at Brandeis, when we got to conference play, that was around about the time every professor was assigning the most work. Kids weren't eating, they weren't sleeping. All of a sudden, all the things we said we were going to do in November or in October go by the wayside. But you have this piece of technology that you're wearing that is literally telling you that you are self-destructing. Right? That's what it says. That's what your notifications on your phone say, right? They reach through the phone and slap you and be like, "Hey, go to bed." You are literally self-destructing. And in the moment, you may not feel that way, or you're like, "Hey, I have stuff to do. I need to do this, whatever, whatever, whatever." As coaches, as administrators, right? I remember we got like, obviously mental health is everything. And it was like great interview with Dan Hurley, and we'll dive into that, I'm sure, another time. Shout out Liz Reed for sending that over to me. Just getting a subscription to the Headspace app isn't enough. Providing logins for everybody in the athletic department to the Calm app is not enough. Right? It's a tool. Just like if you were to say, "Hey, go build a house, here's a hammer." It's a tool. They don't know how to use it. Moreover, the decision maker, aka the coach, may or may not be encouraging of its use. But if we took a more affirmative approach to say, "Hey, we're going to use this Catapult system that we've invested in," right? The heart rate monitors and all that stuff. And we ask the team and we sit down as coaches and we say, "How do we leverage this in the most productive and positive way possible to help our players heat the cheese and create their character, which is the consistency of their positive habits, so that the only excuse for somebody beating us is that they were just better than us." What if we started from that point and we said, just kind of like, I think, what was it? It was the British Cycling Federation. That's where 1% better came from, right? Isn't that what it was? I think that's what it was. They were like trying to redo how they do everything. So realistically, if we have all this technology available to us, instead of saying, "All right, well, Kyle, your work rate at practice wasn't high enough, and you didn't cover enough ground based on the GPS." What if we were to build in rest periods to where everybody's work rate was just a little bit lower, but we were being more efficient with that work rate? Similarly with your Apple Watches or your rings. Hey, we're all going to submit our sleep scores to the app. We're all going to make sure that we try to close our rings for the day. We know that you're going to get enough exercise at practice. Let's see if we can use MyFitnessPal and log our nutrition, not to count calories, but to make sure we're getting the right calories. Right? And it's sort of reframing all of these resources as a way to optimize the variables in your life, just the same way that we want to optimize the variables on the court, on the field, on the track, whatever it is. And I think in that way, if we talked about gamification earlier, we're tapping into the base level of what athletes and coaches and people love to do, which is to compete. I love to compete. I know you love to compete. Let's compete the right way. Let's compete for the right things. I think that's what your Aura Ring allows you to do. It's the same thing my Apple Watch allows me to do. It allows me to compete with myself from yesterday. And isn't that the message that we would continually send to our teams is like, hey, we're not playing, you know, we're not playing uh we're not playing Cushing. We're playing Worcester Academy from yesterday. We're just trying to be better than we were yesterday and trying to beat our old habits so we can create new ones. And so I even think about things like, getting in the weight room. That's always been an edge for the teams that I've coached is like we have been dedicated to the weight room. What if we were just as dedicated to our sleep? What if we were just as dedicated to our nutrition? What if we were just as dedicated to our relationships, to those four priorities that you talked about, the connection piece? Can we put a score on our connections with our teammates? But instead, and a lot of this stems from home too, what is really prioritized is your own exceptionalism, right? You're not encouraged to heat the cheese because that's going out of your way and it might make you look bad.
Mm-hmm.
When in the meantime, what you're doing on the court or on the bench makes you look worse. And so part of this is learning how to use that technology to even become a better teammate.
That's an interesting perspective there, because I think when anytime we're working on something like this, it's like I'm using this data to make me better. I'm only focusing on me. We're all pretty egocentric species anyway, right? Like it's typically about us, regardless of whatever it is. But you mentioned character, consistency of positive habits, and like at the end of the day, the whole goal is to make the next best decision, and that's basically what all this is. Like that score output is the result of a number of decisions that are made. The result of our game, our offensive output, how many points we scored, how many penalties we had against us, how many fouls we drew, how many layups we gave up. Those are all results of a culmination of decisions that were made. I either sprinted back on defense or I didn't. I communicated with my teammate they were about to get screened or I didn't. I checked my coverage at the offensive line or I didn't. I communicated with the safety this was the audible or I didn't. It's all decisions. And so, what life is really about is just trying to become more consistent, better decision makers. And so, if my sleep score can be positively affected by putting the controller down and going to bed at 9 o'clock instead of playing till 12:30 in the morning, then that's a decision that's going to positively impact me the next day. And again, for me, I'm still going to wake up feeling like shit for a few minutes until I get into the shower, brush my teeth, get dressed, and all that. But my 1:30 self that later that afternoon, or myself sitting in that 9:30 meeting a couple hours later, is going to be in a much better situation and spot. Like me during my first meeting Monday morning this week, I was struggling. Okay, couple cups of coffee, but I stayed up like way too late on Sunday. Passed out super early last night, got like 10 hours of sleep. I cruised all day. And I even got to a point, and this is what kind of made me even think about this, because I had this moment where like I almost felt like I was a little bored today in a moment, because I was like, I should have more stress. I should have more to do in this moment. Like, why am I not freaking out about something? Why am I not panicking over something? Why do I not feel like I'm behind? And I think it's because I had such an efficient morning that by the time that 2:30 feeling hit, it was like, man, like I'm actually good right now. And I would not have had that good feeling at 2:30 had I not had such an 8 to 2:30 run. And I wouldn't have had that run had I not gotten that sleep. So like even as we sit here tonight, 9:35 here on in Central Time, what's my decision going to be? Now, I've still got a little work I need to do even after we sign off and go get some stuff done. But that's where for me, I'd rather stay up late knocking the workout and just get it done, because then that mentally makes me feel better, because I don't want to go to bed with a full inbox. So I feel better kind of knocking all that out, but I can still control some of that, because going to bed at 10:30 versus going to bed at 12:30 might have a huge impact tomorrow.
To extrapolate that further, it'll have a bigger impact on your family after work tomorrow when you go to bed today at 10:30 as opposed to 12:30, because you're going to have the energy to hang out with your kids or with your kid and with your wife and be home and be dad. Right? And we talked about that a little bit in the pre-show too, about how, and we don't have to get into it, but even this idea that like as adults, as who, if you're a parent, if you're a sport parent or whatever, how are you maximizing your scores? What would your score be as you're trying to make sure your kid has the best score on the court or on the field? Are you maximizing that as just a human being? And the answer is probably not.
Mm.
And at what point do you stop driving 600 miles in a weekend? Because eventually that catches up with you and you're not going to be at your best for the things you have to do. Right. So I don't know. As far as a final thought for this episode, I think this has been great to kind of, number one, get back in the pod lab. It feels good to just see you again. I feel like we
Yeah,
haven't
for
seen each
sure.
other in like a month. But realistically, like everything we need is kind of at our fingertips. For you, literally, it's on your finger, right?
Quite literally.
Quite literally. But being cognizant of the fact that if we were to utilize the things that we have available to us, we can take a lot of the variability out of what we're doing, right? And decrease that variability, increase the consistency of our positive habits. And it doesn't matter if it leads to wins on the court. Neither of us are coaching right now, but I feel like it's a win when we get those scores based on the things that we have prioritized. And so I would challenge coaches who are listening to this to start thinking a little bit differently about the metrics that you keep, the way that you get those metrics, and leveraging the technology that your kids already have to make your program better with very little investment of money and of time, because really a lot of it is already done for you. It's automated for you. And the really, really good coaches. And so I'll leave with this thought. One of our friends of the pod, he's a tennis coach in Division III. There was at one point, and I think this was pre-pandemic, he wanted to buy Whoop bands for his whole team. You know what a Whoop band is? WHOOP.
I don't think I do.
So it's kind of like an Oura ring, but it's a band that
Oh,
you
okay.
wear around your wrist. It
Oh,
doesn't
okay.
have it doesn't have a screen. I think actually the new ones might have a screen, but before they were just a band. And it was for tracking all of that stuff, right? But it was on the tennis side, it was work rate and all of that too.
Sure. Got you.
And they never did it, but that's somebody who realistically, knowing him and knowing his character, he would take that and run with it in the right direction to say, hey, let's use this to maximize everything that we're doing. We may not have a team full of 5 stars, but what we do is have a team full of 5-star people who want to improve. And they're 5 stars at wanting to get better. So here's how we can leverage this to help them get better, instead of them just having this shiny toy and not using it to its fullest capability. And I think that's what we've seen a lot in athletics just in general, right? There's a lot of those shiny toys, but I'm not sure we use them to their fullest capabilities. So I would hope any coach listening to this, any athlete listening to this, like any parent listening to this, hey, you've spent the money on this thing already. Now let's leverage it to help you improve as a human being, because the human component is always undefeated.